but your entire city is on... There's a character in this game named Mike. You're a mass of tentacles, and this World War II strategy game has freezing time in an action game. Sounds incredible.
Oof. It was 2021 when a guy writing on a blog called Death is a Whale did something that was both incredibly nerdy and kind of brilliant. He took 22 well-known single-player games from Batman to Call of Duty and looked at Steam's public achievement statistics. Across those 22 games, the average completion rate was 35%. Only 1 out of every 3 players actually makes it to the credits. So my immediate thought is, 2/3 of people who bought these games never even saw the ending. Maybe people really tend to not finish games anymore. Maybe Doomscrolling is making us not to finish games anymore. But is that really true, or is it something else? Because, you know, there is this common belief that says, back in the day people actually finished games, today nobody does. And they try to explain it telling you that back on the NES you own maybe 3 games, so you played them over and over until the cartridge practically wore out. Today you've got 200 games on Steam that you've never even launched, and instead of playing anything you spend the evening scrolling through your library. So this seems to be the general belief, but when you actually start looking for historical data, it doesn't really support that story. Or at least there could be another kind of reason why. Around 10 years before that 2021 analysis, so roughly in 2010, there was already an industry estimate suggesting that average completion rates were actually lower than they are today, not higher. There's no official data here, but if that's true, then players today actually finish more games than they did a decade ago. There's also an academic study published on Science Direct in March 2019 that analyzed a much larger dataset, including thousands of tiny indie games. There, the average completion rate dropped all the way down to around 10 to 16%. But that dataset also included things like $3 indie games people bought in bundles and never ever launched. So that brings us to another possible reason. In 2018, 8,883 games were released on Steam. In 2024, that number grew up roughly at 19,000. And just remember, these are estimates. In October 2024 alone, roughly 2,000 games launched on Steam. That's more games in 1 month than Steam released in total between 2006 and 2012. And I think this is the real heart of the question. It's not that players have fundamentally changed, it's that the amount of choice has exploded beyond what any human brain can realistically process. Back in 2000, psychologists Sheena Iyengar and Mark Lepper ran a famous experiment. In one version, shoppers could choose between 24 different jars of jam. In another, there were only 6. When people saw more choices, more of them stopped to look. But far fewer actually bought anything compared to the smaller display. So the more options you have, the harder choosing becomes. And even after you've made a decision, you're more likely to regret it because part of your brain keeps wondering about all the options you didn't choose. Now imagine that jam stand, not with 24 jars, with 19,000. There's another statistic that, to me, summarizes this entire problem better than anything else. In 2024, a company called Game Discover Co., working with GameAnalytics.info, analyzed hundreds of thousands of public Steam profiles to figure out how many games in the average Steam library are never launched at all. On average, 32.7% of the games people own have never been opened. Not even once. And the median player has 51.5% of their Steam library completely untouched. More than half. Just sitting there, never played. So to me, that's worse than a low completion rate. If someone starts my game and doesn't finish it, at least they played it. Maybe they didn't like it, but if they never even launch it, then the game is just another file on a hard drive. So, when I saw that, I thought about my own Steam library, and I completely understand how we got here. I've bought games during the Christmas sale that somehow are still unopened, and it's already August. There's one more piece of this puzzle, and it has to do with how long games actually take to finish today compared to the past. A group of researchers built a massive database called Play My Data, combining nearly 100,000 games with completion times collected from how long to beat. The result was surprisingly not what I expected. On average, modern games actually take less time to finish than games from the mid-2000s, but more time than games from the early 90s. There was even a strange peak around 2013 for some reason. And that raises actually another question. Maybe we are not finishing fewer games. Maybe games have simply become longer, packed with more content. So the limited time we have gets spread across fewer games, which basically is the same reason why we used to finish all games. Same result for two different reasons. At this point, let's just go back to where we started. Why don't we finish games anymore? Has doomscrolling ruined gaming too? The honest answer is these two things are not correlated. Doomscrolling has ruined games, yes, but this doesn't mean that we don't finish games anymore. It's just that we have much more stuff to play than ever before. And that stuff keeps getting bigger every single day. So now it's your turn. How many Ghost games do you have sitting in your Steam library? And what's the last game you actually finished from beginning to end? Thanks for watching.